Turn up your radio. It's time for DeLorean Talk with your host, Dave Tavers.
Hi, and thanks for listening to DeLorean Talk. This is Dave Tavers. I'm very excited today to have Jordan Livingston from the Bay Area here with me. Met Jordan at DCS 2018 and got a chance to chat a little bit. He's been working on a documentary for the last 10 years about the DeLorean community and the DeLorean overall, and got a chance to chit chat and thought, hey, if I can get him on the show, we can learn a little bit more about him ahead of the release of his movie, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly. So, Jordan, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Dave. I'm happy to be here.
So I usually start out with the simplest question. What's your VIN number?
I am 10657. And believe me, that has nothing to do with any of my ATM codes or PIN numbers or anything like that.
657 and I'm 515. We're pretty close brothers there.
Yeah, so they must be a couple weeks apart, I believe.
So we probably have pretty identical cars. I'm guessing it's a manual, gray?
No, I have that elusive gray automatic.
Oh, you got an Wow. So
yeah, that's what everybody says. The first thing they say is, "Oh, you got an automatic," and I wasn't really looking. I was sort of agnostic. Although living in San Francisco, I do have to say that the automatic is nice, and I probably drive it a lot more than I would otherwise. But it just so happens that this car was an automatic, and so I jumped at it. People have told me that it's actually a more rare, more elusive combination to find the gray automatic. I don't know if that's true. It's not why I bought it. It just was a coincidence. I was actually looking to buy one sort of on and off, half seriously for many, many years. But when I started making this documentary and I started meeting people in the DeLorean community, I wound up interviewing over 100 DeLorean owners. Wow. And what ended up happening is every time anyone wanted to sell their car, I would get messages on Facebook from pretty much everyone in the community. So I had like my finger on the pulse of all the DeLoreans that were available. It took a long time before there was one that really ticked all my boxes. I knew I was never going to buy a concourse car. Having said that, I'm not a mechanic. I don't really work on the car except for electrical issues. Mm-hmm. I knew that I wanted something reliable that I could drive around in and not worry about. I think it's like pretty regularly you see concourse cars with very high approaching six-figure sum for sale, and you see really beat up cars in horrible condition that are going to need to have double or triple their asking price put into them.
Right.
It's really hard to find that car that's sort of like pretty good at a medium price
range. Yeah.
And that's what I found. I still ended up having to do a lot of work into it. One of the things for me was I wanted it to have a perfect aesthetic. So I knew that mechanically I could put a lot of new parts into it and get a lot of new parts. But I know that certain components in terms of the original interior are no longer available. And obviously certain stainless steel panels like the front left fender are no longer available. So I wanted the body to be perfect, free of dents, free of cracks, and I wanted the interior to be perfect. And other than that, and it really was.
Oh, nice.
I did have the car regrained. It needed a regraining, but structurally it was perfect. It was pretty much dent free, and the interior was just perfect. Nice. And everything else mechanical, you don't really see what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
So it's all under the hood.
I'm a 2.5-year owner, and I've taken that direction of I want the car to look the way it's supposed to look, but if it's things you can't see, normal people can't walk up and look at it, I don't mind making changes that are hidden. Chris Miles sourced and put together a nice big flat LED light that replaces the trunk light. And man, it is so bright. It is fantastic. It takes 2 minutes to put in. I don't mind changing that because nobody ever sees that unless you open the trunk. And if people are standing there watching, that's fine. When you can't see it when you're driving down the road. The new fuel lines, nobody can see that unless you open up the engine cover. anything underneath. I've talked about on past episodes that I sent my original ASI radio over to Dimitri in France and had him put Bluetooth into it.
I have the same thing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's one of the best things I did because I wanted to keep the original stereo.
Yeah, so for me, it's the same thing. Like aesthetically, I want anything that you can see in the car to be original.
Yeah.
Finding that ASI radio was a multi-year treasure hunt to find one. But yeah, things that make the car safer and more reliable. New fuel lines, new hoses, new gaskets. I don't have original brakes. I have modified brakes that stop the car on a dime. Things like that. I want those things to be modernized.
Yeah.
When it comes to like the things that you actually see or look at, I want the car to be a time machine, so to speak, in the sense that I want it to be like how it was. I just think that I'm not a car designer, and my ideas, they're not going to improve on the original design. I want to preserve that original design.
Yep.
Not everyone would agree with me. I think you should do what you want to your car.
Right.
Do whatever you want.
Yep.
But for my car, I'm very much like a preservationist. That being said, I'm never going to be a concourse guy because I want to drive the car and I want it to drive well.
Yeah. You live in San Rafael, California, Northern California Bay Area. Did you find the car in the Bay Area, or did you have to travel someplace for it?
No. So in the end, the car was actually located in Indiana. I broke the cardinal rule of used car buying, which is I bought the car sight unseen.
You're not the only DeLorean person that's done that.
The thing is, I would never recommend it, and I would never advocate it, and I wouldn't even do it myself. The thing is that by the time I finally bought my car, I knew so many members in the DeLorean community who had seen the car and who had vouched for the car and who had I even knew people who had worked on this particular car in the past. I was pretty realistic. I knew what I was getting. I knew what it was. I knew what it wasn't. I knew what its value was. Having said that, it still was kind of a shock when I got it. I was prepared for that shock, though. I knew exactly what I was getting into. So I have no bad feelings about it. And everything that the guy represented about it was 100% truthful.
Yeah.
So, there's pretty much no frame damage, no rust, and everything that he said worked, and everything that he said didn't work. There were still some surprises because having been in Indiana, the car had never been through what in California we have the smog check.
Yeah.
So the car had never been smogged. What was presented, what was there as the catalytic converter was basically nothing more than
a shell.
A mocked up prop pretending to be. There was no catalytic converter. When I actually took it off to replace it, just like dust poured out of it, like sand poured out of it. It had no functionality at all. The way that I had the engine tuned for whatever kind of gas they have in Indiana was that the tuning was all wrong, and it would pretty much overheat the minute you started it. But to be honest, once I took it to just like the garden variety garage and they just put a brand new cat and then did a basic tune-up and the car ran perfectly. I've never had a breakdown.
That's lucky. You haven't had it overheat since.
Nope, I've never had any major problems. I do have it worked on pretty regularly. I do all the oil changes on time or early, and I'm very good at doing all my maintenance on it. But no, I've never had a problem. And then taken it on a few road trips. I haven't gone the farthest I've taken it was to Las Vegas and back, and from San Francisco to Vegas and back, and didn't have a single problem.
Awesome. Did you go for DeLorean Week in Las Vegas or something else?
No, well, that's actually a funny story. My Las Vegas DeLorean story is actually also my wedding story. So being a part of the DeLorean community has changed my life in ways that I never could have possibly imagined or anticipated. Making my movie, working on this documentary, which is called Living the Dream, took me to Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I originally went to Eurofest, which is a gathering of DeLorean owners in Europe. And then subsequently, I went to a DeLorean factory reunion. Most of your listeners to the show probably already know this, but the car was built in Northern Ireland in Dunmurry, which is just outside Belfast. And a lot of the original workers who worked on the car, they're still very much alive and very active in DeLorean events and in the DeLorean world, and they have so much information and so many rich stories to tell.
This was the Eurofest and reunion just 2 years ago then.
Well, so I've been there. I've been to Belfast a couple times. This is a really long preamble to the Vegas wedding story, but I've been there several times over the course of the last 5 or 6 years because of filming different interviews for my movie with people that built the DeLorean in the original factory in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And who knew that doing that, I ended up meeting my wife in Ireland. I was traveling. I took an extra week to go to Dublin.
You dog.
Yep.
That is awesome, man.
So I met my wife in Dublin, Ireland. So when she moved out to the United States a couple years later and we decided to get married, neither one of us really wanted a wedding. Like neither one of us was, dying to have this big wedding.
Sure.
And
big show.
It just wasn't in either one of our plans. And so we were talking about eloping. We were talking about having a very small civil thing at the courthouse, what would be meaningful to us. And my wife, who's from Ireland, actually suggested, well, we met because of the DeLorean. We should do a drive-through wedding in Vegas in the DeLorean.
That is, holy cow, that's the best story I've heard so far.
Well, so at that point, I knew I was marrying the right girl, for one thing.
Yeah.
So we actually went to the drive-through. Her parents came from Ireland, and my parents and my brother came, and that was it. We had a very small ceremony with just our immediate family.
Nice.
At the drive-through wedding in Las Vegas. We left 2 days early because I had no idea if the DeLorean would make it. I said, I've never driven it this far.
Right.
This is the farthest I've ever taken it. So it made it to the wedding just fine. We didn't need the extra day. And then it made it home just fine.
Let's go back for a second. You said that when you were looking for the DeLorean, your car, had ticked all of your boxes. I had my list, which is for many, many, many years, I had my list. And as I learned more about the car and the community, I thought it is going to be impossible to get my list. Through a miracle, every one of I only had 5 check boxes. They all got checked. So what was on your list that you were able to tick off?
So I knew I wanted a gray interior, and I knew I wanted a gas flap hood. I was hoping I would find an 82 model year because I'm born in 82 and I wanted the same year as me. Don't ask me why, but I like
That's
little
great.
Superstitious things like
No.
I wanted to be able to tell people I'm the same age as the car.
Yeah.
But so that was an odd thing because the only way that would happen is if someone actually had replaced the hood because there were no 82 gas flap hood gray cars.
You started doing the documentary before you owned a DeLorean.
Yes, so now we'll get into the interesting part of the conversation. You can cut all that other nonsense out.
No.
So, yeah, well, I've been obsessed with the car my whole life. I started doing the documentary long before I ever owned one just because I loved them. And I sort of had this lifelong relationship with them that really began in earnest in college. I went to film school. I was going to Chapman University in Orange, California, and I was studying film production. And I had written a movie that was a period piece set in the 80s called How Soon Is Now. And it was inspired by the John Hughes movies. It was really just a ripoff of like John Hughes movies. And I'd written in a DeLorean because, I just love the car and it's set in the 80s and it was just basically an excuse to have one.
Right.
So, but I didn't think I would actually find one. So this was in like 2001. And I think at the time I put an ad on Craigslist, and the ad was responded by Don Seeger at what at the time was the DeLorean Motor Center in Garden Grove,
right,
which is really near Chapman. I didn't even know that. First of all, in 2001, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a DeLorean Motor Center anywhere,
right,
let alone, in
Down
Orange County, right? Yeah. So Don Steger ends up showing up on the set of my student film for no money. I mean, literally for free, with not just one, but 2 DeLoreans. He says, well, I brought a gray one and a black one. You can take your pick. And so that was kind of my first real flirtation with it. So then several years go by, and I'd always remembered in the back of my mind that there's the DeLorean Motor Center, Don Steger. Now I'm out of college and I'm working in the film industry, but I'm also pursuing a career. I'm trying to get my own independent projects off the ground. I believe this was right around 2007. The DeLorean Motor Company in Texas issued one of their many, but at the time this was the first one that I had seen, sort of press releases about the fact that they were remanufacturing DeLoreans with all of the original parts.
Right.
And so I thought that was an incredible story. So I actually pitched this as a short film to the news organization called Current TV.
Yeah.
And so back in 2007, they would actually pay for user-generated content on TV, and it was kind of a weird thing that only happened for a minute.
Yeah.
And
so they ran out of money.
So yeah, well, they ran out of money, and also the content was probably not very good, in my opinion. But
right.
People are giving it away for free on YouTube. Why is someone going to pay for it? So that whole business model was still being fleshed out. But I got $1,000 from Current TV.
Nice.
To do a news story on the fact that they were remanufacturing the DeLorean.
Wow.
And I called it Back to the DeLorean. And what I did was I took the $1,000. I ended up spending like $5,000 because you can't do anything for $1,000. You can't even rent the camera for one day.
Yeah.
It's a joke. So I ended up spending $5,000 going down with some other friends from film down, and I got the whole rundown of what was going on by Don Steger and Danny Botkin. And then I also interviewed Don's wife, Nancy Steger, and I interviewed some of the mechanics that work there. And so my plan was, well, I'm going to produce this short film for Current TV, but I'm spending all my own money on the footage, so I'm going to keep the footage, and I might make something else. There might be something else I can do with this DeLorean footage. I go down and I shoot for like a full day at Garden Grove, and I interviewed these people, and I made the short film and I put it out there, and I like never heard from them ever again. And it must have been maybe 2 years later, I was on an airplane. I was on a Virgin flight, and Virgin had Current TV on the plane, and they were showing something called the best of Current TV. And I was like, the best of Current TV. And they showed, and I saw my movie. I saw Back to the DeLorean
on the plane.
This was like, and it was interspersed with like a Geico commercial. And so I thought, wait a minute, like this is my little short film that I never even heard from them is the best of Current TV, and Geico is advertising.
Nice.
I thought, okay, well, there's definitely something to this story that resonated that I didn't even realize. And also, why doesn't maybe Geico will finance a feature.
Yeah.
So this was kind of like the birth of the idea that there was more to the story. The other thing that was happening at the same time is that people who had seen the Current TV thing, I'd also put it up on YouTube as well, had been emailing me, and they were saying like, well, I have a DeLorean, I'm in Wisconsin, or I have a DeLorean, I'm in Chicago, or I did this crazy thing to my DeLorean, I made a hovercraft.
Right.
I made this, you should come film me for your movie. There was like this weird assumption that there was a movie. I'm the kind of person that listens to those signs from the universe, and I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to make this feature film about DeLorean owners.
Nice.
And so sort of between 2007 and 2009, somewhere in between there, I sort of started the project in earnest.
Just collecting footage and talking to people.
Well, what I started doing was I started going to DCS, the DeLorean car show. And so the first one I went to was Las Vegas in 2009. And I started collecting people's stories. And then after going to a couple of these different things, the guys in Texas, like they started to open up to me. So they invited me to come down. I started filming them. It just one thing led to another. And so I eventually was invited to Eurofest to see what was going on in Europe and meet the factory workers.
Nice.
That was a huge milestone. I mean, that was a game changer for the project, because up until that point, I think I was still making what was basically a short film. It was a kind of a film that was like, there's a bunch of crazy DeLorean owners who are obsessed with their car and keep the car on the road and modify it, make it into a monster truck, make it into a hovercraft, make it into a limousine. And isn't that neat? Isn't that neat and weird and crazy? And isn't that odd? But then when I went to Northern Ireland, it completely blew my world wide open, because what I realized is that there's actually a story of political intrigue, and that the making of the DeLorean impacted these people's lives so profoundly. And there's nobody in Northern Ireland that that hasn't been touched in some way by the DeLorean story.
Yeah.
You get into a taxi, you're in a cab, or you're at a bar, and everyone says, what are you doing in town? Oh, you're here from California. What are you doing? Oh, I'm making a documentary about DeLorean. Oh, DeLorean. Yeah, my uncle worked there. Or, oh, DeLorean. Yeah, my dad worked there. Or, oh, I saw one. Yeah, I saw one. It was the coolest thing. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Or, oh, I never want to hear that man's name again. That man is not welcome here in Ireland.
Yeah.
I never want to speak of that man. Or, that man was the greatest person to ever come to Northern Ireland. He did more for our country than anyone. You have these incredibly strong
feelings,
relationships, and feelings and emotions associated with it. Very first thing that happened when I got to Northern Ireland, I mean, it's very different, because you meet a DeLorean owner in America and the DeLorean owner says, let me show you my DeLorean. You meet someone associated with DeLorean in Northern Ireland and it's, come stay in my house.
Oh, wow.
Let me make you dinner. Come stay with me. And so I was being invited into these people's homes, and I was being told tear-filled stories about how it was the best job they ever had in their life. It stopped the violence, and it saved their lives, and it gave them peace. And so many of these profound stories. And you go into these people's homes, and I met people who had folders where they had every single pay stub that they'd ever received, like laminated, and people who still had the uniform, they didn't give the uniform back, or they still have the badge, their ID badge.
Right.
I mean, I don't know about you, Dave, but I've had dozens of jobs in my life, and I'd be hard pressed to even remember all the jobs. I don't save anything. It moved me profoundly that so many of these people had such a beautiful experience. And then you start getting into the whole political intrigue. There's this conspiracy theory about Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and the IRA.
Yep.
And whether it's true or not, my film doesn't really purport to have any definitive answers, but I allow people to tell their stories.
Sure.
And some of the stories, whether they're true or not, they're incredible stories.
Well, they're the stories from those people.
Well, they're perspectives.
Right. That's their version of history and time. True or not doesn't matter. It's how it impacted their lives.
When I went to Northern Ireland, that's when I realized that this was a much bigger film to be made, that this was actually not a story about a car, but this is a story about people.
Yeah.
And that there's an international story to tell, and that there was a feature-length film, and that I owed the subject matter a certain amount of reverence. And so it really changed my course. And I realized if I had $1 million sitting in the bank, I could have just written a check and had this movie produced and had the movie out. But I knew that I was going to be scrounging and paying for this movie out of my spare change.
Yeah.
So that's why it's taken me so many years. When you said early in the intro, I've been working on the movie for over 10 years. It's not like I'm working on it for over 10 years every day.
Yeah.
There might be some years where I don't work on it at all. And then there might be some years where I work on it for 2 weeks. But for the most part, I've been working in my spare time and using my spare money, just being patient and persistent and trying to tell the story in the way that the story deserves and should be told. And I'm finally nearing the end of the journey where the movie's essentially finished. There now is a movie from start to finish. It's a feature-length film.
Nice.
And it basically tells the story of the rise and demise of the car company, the resurrection of the car in popular culture thanks to Back to the Future, and then the last 36 years of DeLorean ownership and the DeLorean community and what the people have done with the car and keeping the car alive. I'm still raising money and hopeful that there will be investors that will come along to help pay for things that I can't do myself. The backbone of the movie is basically done. And that's what's taken so long. And the rest is really just about raising enough money to take it over the finish line.
Yeah.
And if anyone out there wants to write a check and become an executive producer, please call me after the program and we can talk.
Good. So you started working on it in around 2007, and you only just bought your car 3 years ago. So for 7 years, you were filming people, traveling to Ireland, going to DCS shows, and you weren't an owner. I hope I never become one of the elitists that think that the DeLorean is a 1 in a million Ferrari, but I know that for the many years that I wanted a car, for the few years I was a member of the Seattle DeLorean Club and did not have a car, I did not understand. I don't think it's possible to truly understand the car unless you own one. But here you are making a movie about it and interviewing all these people. Now that you've owned the car for 3 years, you've had it long enough, you've driven it, you've enjoyed it, you know how people feel about the car itself when you drive it. When you look back on the previous 7 years of not having the car and doing all the filming, are you surprised at some of the questions you asked, or was it a natural progression in learning from all the other people?
Every single person encouraged me to become an owner. In general, the owner base likes to share their DeLoreans.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times people would hand me their keys. I will also say that making the movie and putting myself out there and going out on Facebook and seeking people to contribute into the film probably opened a lot of doors for me that a lot of people might not otherwise have. But I will say that the DeLorean community is pretty well advertised, and they're all over Facebook. And
that's what I mean. Now this is not back in my day, but in the 90s, DeLorean mailing list was pretty much it.
Oh, sure. Well, like I said, when I was making my film in college and I put an ad out on Craigslist saying, I'm looking for a DeLorean, does anybody have one? I had no idea that there was a DeLorean Motor Center
down the street. Yeah.
So I just didn't know my history. But these cars have this very unique situation that happened to them where even though the car company that manufactured them went out of business, this whole cottage industry sprouted up that supported them.
Obviously, the big one is it's Back to the Future, but also the internet. Back to the Future alone, sure, brought it into the spotlight, and a lot of people learned about it and found out about it. But I really think it was when the internet took over is when suddenly people around the world could see the pictures. In the early 90s, in the mid 90s, I worked at Microsoft on Internet Explorer version 4. I never, and I was a DeLorean nut then. There was no DeLorean pictures. It was the DeLorean mailing list, and that was, very old, and there were not pictures in that for the most part. So yeah, having the internet has changed DeLorean future ownership for a lot of people because they can follow the car.
I think a huge part of that, a huge amount of the credit is probably owed to DMC Talk, which was like a DeLorean forum. And then a lot of that's still active, but a lot of that community subsequently migrated to Facebook.
Right.
And the community became enriched. And then now on Facebook, of course, you have every major city in the world has a DeLorean group. There's a group in Puerto Rico. There's a group in New Zealand.
Yep.
And again, I only know this because I was making a film about it. I actually traveled to New Zealand for the first ever in history DeLorean Owners Meetup of New Zealand.
Nice.
It was amazing. There was like 14 cars that showed up there. I mean, who even knew that there were 14 cars in New Zealand?
Right.
Period.
Right.
Let alone that they were all available on this one weekend day to come together. I just think that it speaks to the mystique and the allure of the car that there is an international community surrounding it.
Yeah.
And there's a level of fun. There's a fun aspect to it that doesn't exist in any other car. There is something really unique and magical, and it's one of the things I'm trying to discover what that is and shed light on that in the documentary.
Nice. It's funny that you said that, because this last weekend for me, the DeLorean San Diego Club had a tech event, and just driving down there, it took me about 2 hours from where I'm at in Orange County. And it's just so fun to drive the car. And the question popped into my head, is there anybody that has more fun driving their car than a DeLorean owner? Because even if I don't care how fast, if you got a Bugatti or a Ferrari or something that does 8 million miles an hour, you can't drive it that fast anywhere on public roads.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, the fun with those cars ends the minute I get the insurance bill. I would be like, oh, no fun. But the DeLorean owner is a very unique type of person. I mean, it attracts a unique personality. And you see this time and time again at car shows. You see a DeLorean pulls up next to a Lamborghini or a Pagani or something, and something else, usually with interesting doors. And the DeLorean's parked right next to it. And, the person who owns the other car will be standing there with his arms folded, scowl on the face, and will have nothing to say to anyone. No touching. Can I sit in it? No. Can my son take a picture on it? Don't touch it. Don't lean against it. Don't lean against. And you see this time and time again. And meanwhile, the DeLorean person is just like, oh yeah, have your kids sit in the driver's seat. I'll take their picture.
Yeah.
And I see this time and time again. It's just a different type of personality. It's a different type of owner. It's a type of an owner that is sort of extroverted and likes to share and likes to talk and hold court and, talk about their car and share it with other people. I don't know a lot of other car enthusiasts who necessarily all share that characteristic, but it seems to be that all DeLorean owners share this characteristic, that they are very outgoing and that they want to share the car, and that they actually are having a lot more fun with their car. And probably because it's by no means a cheap car, but it's probably because it's not going to kill you if something happens to it. It's not going to bankrupt the family dynasty if something goes wrong. So it's accessible. I think it's impossible to be pretentious about the car with any degree of credibility.
Yeah.
It is a fun car. It always has been fun. And I think that the owners who have embraced that,
they're having fun. So with your wife being from Ireland, does she, and now do you call it the trunk or the boot?
Well, I'm adopting all of her Irish colloquialisms because they're just so much better than ours. So with the DeLorean, I never knew what to call it. I mean, I guess Tesla calls it the frunk. I used to call it the bonnet. And I heard several people call it the bonnet when I was in Belfast, Northern Ireland, which is, again, the UK. So that might be the British way of saying it. I don't know. I always called it the bonnet. Just in general, not referring to the DeLorean, referring to other cars, I say boot because, as my wife would correct me, she would inform me elephants have trunks.
So your wife is the one that encouraged you to take the car to Vegas to get married, since the car brought you together. Is she 50% as passionate about the car as you are? Is she into it, or is this kind of your hobby?
I wish she was here so she could speak for herself right now. My wife is not as passionate about the car in the same way that I am. I mean, keep in mind, you're talking to a guy that spent more than 10 years making a documentary about it
Right.
and has interviewed over 100 people about it. So no, I'm a little bit excessive. But my wife has excellent taste. She has impeccable style and taste when it comes to cars. I'm hard pressed to even think of a time when I disagree with her taste in cars. So she does like the DeLorean. She finds it to be comfortable. She finds it to be stylish. I think she enjoys it. She really enjoys meeting all the new people and the doors that it opens and doing these events. And we just get to
Good.
see and meet people and do things that we never would have done. From that point of view, I think she loves it and she adores it. From the point of view of I'm up at 5 a.m. trying to get fingerprints off of it before a show, she doesn't quite share that level of passion with me.
Right.
That can be forgiven.
She supports the car. She has fun with it as well. Not every spouse is as into the car. They're more likely to say, just go do your thing, and that's your hobby. So, well, couple last questions for you.
Okay.
Do you remember what the mileage was when you bought the car, and how many miles have you put on it since?
Well, I can tell you I just passed 50,000 miles.
Wow.
Which is pretty young still. So I got a youngin'. Well, I've heard of people that have gone multiple hundreds of thousands.
And knowing that you're enjoying the car and it's not a museum piece, I always try closing with it because it seems like a silly question, but it's for partially my own learning. What's in your trunk right now?
So in my frunk or my bonnet,
Right.
So there is the original stainless steel car care kit that came with the car when it was purchased new, which is there strictly for show purposes. There is, of course, the completely useless and arguably dangerous spare tire, also for show purposes. The original tools are still there.
Nice.
And then I have quite a robust toolkit. I have like a fold out, like a tri-fold, just a basic toolkit. And then last but not least, I have my stainless steel polish, rubber gloves, and microfiber cloth for cleaning it, which basically happens on every outing.
Right. Great. Well, definitely looking forward to hearing that the movie is being released in any form. Is that going to happen in 2019, or is that still up in the air?
At this point, the film is at a point where it's completed from a creative and an artistic standpoint. It's there. What needs to happen now are the finishing touches, such as sound, graphics, music, things that require third parties.
Yeah.
And I am still raising funds to do that. So I can't give you an exact date when that's going to happen, but I will say that it's all happening very proactively at this point. Every facet is moving forward. So if I were to be optimistic, I could say within the year, but I'll just say at this point that it's not yet known, but I'm working on it as hard as I can to do it as quickly as possible.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you at DCS and chatting, and thanks for taking the time to join me here and get your story, because yours definitely is an interesting story, and I would say pretty unique.
Well, thank you for having me. The pleasure was mine.
Thanks again, Jordan, for joining me, and for all those people out there that are listening, thank you very much for spending the time and for all the wonderful emails. Be sure to check out DeLorean Talk on pretty much all the social media platforms. Give comments, tell others about it, spread it around your local car club if you have one. I would love to interview some DeLorean Club presidents around the world to hear about their clubs and what they're doing, so that other clubs can get some ideas from you if you're doing something fun or unique. And I promise I will do more of these and get more interviews done with owners. And if you have connections with somebody that are important to the community, please do forward on my information. It would be great to get some more fancy people, not just normal people like us, to tell the stories. So drive safe and watch the fingerprints.